Everyone, today we're going to be going over volume of prisms and cylinders. So by the end of our playlist, you should be able to find the volume of rectangular and triangular prisms and find the volume of a cylinder. Okay, so we're going to begin with talking about what volume is. Volume is the amount of space that an object takes up. And so we're talking about three-dimensional objects, objects that you could hold or that you could look at, such as a cylinder or a prism. Okay, and volume is always measured in cubic units, such as feet cubed, inches cubed, and centimeters cubed. You could also call them cubic feet, or cubic inches, or cubic centimeters. And like I said, I like to think of it as the amount of space that an object takes up. And there are lots of things in the real world where we care about what the volume is because we want to know how much space is inside. So some examples would be how much juice is in a juice container, how much ice cream is in a cone. That's kind of a fun one to think about. How much water is in a water balloon, and that shape, that 3D shape for that water balloon could be like a sphere. So we would want volume formulas for all of these examples that I'm putting up here. And there's a different formula for each shape or each 3D I guess it's just a shape that we're talking about. So the last two say how much water could be contained in a tube or maybe even in a pipe. That would be like a cylinder. And how much sand might be needed to fill 2 inches of a terrarium so that you could put an animal like a bearded dragon in there. That would be like a rectangular prism. Okay, and we are talking about some specific shapes, and today we're going to really focus in on prisms and cylinders. Now, a prism is a three-dimensional solid that has two parallel bases that are congruent. That's so important. You need to be looking for two parallel bases that are congruent. So on all of these, we can find that. We've got, for this triangular prism, we've got two triangular bases that are congruent and they're parallel to each other. And that's the case for all of these shapes that we're looking at. We name prisms by the shape of their base. Okay, so just to let you know, this one here on the bottom is called a pentagonal prism, and that's because the bases are pentagons. And there are two of them. They're identical, they're congruent, and they're parallel to each other. So that's why we call that a pentagonal prism. The other one is a hexagonal prism or hexagonal prism. We've got two bases that are hexagons. They're parallel to each other. They're congruent. So that's why this is a prism. All of the prisms have rectangles on them. But that doesn't mean they're rectangular prisms. Those aren't necessarily the bases unless you're dealing with a rectangular prism whose bases are rectangles. Okay, a cube is actually a specific kind of rectangular prism whose faces are all squares. Okay, but it's still a prism. And so we can use the same rule for finding volume for all of these prisms. All right, but first, before we do that, I just want to mention a little bit more about naming the prisms. Notice that a triangular prism has that triangle as the base. There are two bases that are triangles that are identical. And the rectangular prism has a rectangle as a base. Okay, so I want you to maybe pause the recording right now and go through each of these 6 3D objects that I put up here and see if you can name them with their bases. Use the base to name the prism. So pause the recording right now and unpause it when you're ready to check all of your answers. Okay, hopefully you've gone through some of these. The first 3 are all triangular prisms. None of them are pyramids. So if you're looking at it and thinking, well, maybe it's a pyramid. No, because all of them have two bases that are parallel and that are identical, congruent. And not only that, notice how they all look a little different, but they're all triangular prisms. And that's because the triangles are the bases for each one, even though they all look just a little bit different. Okay, and then we've got a rectangular prism looking like a box. And then for this one in the middle, on the bottom, our base is a hexagon. So that's a hexagonal prism. And then we've got a pentagon for the base on the last one. So that's a pentagonal prism or a pentagonal prism. So at this point, you are ready to begin the quiz for today. So I'd like you to go to www.joinquizzes.com and enter the game code that was provided with this recording, and you're ready for question 1. You don't need to do questions 2 through 5 yet because we will be doing that with the rest of our playlist.